In the heart of a great, whispering forest, where ancient Irako trees stood as pillars between the earth and the sky, there was a village called Ididara. Its name meant the storyteller's joy, for its people were known far and wide for their wisdom, their generosity, and the depth of their folklore. They lived in harmony with the land, guided by the gentle counsel of their elders and the watchful presence of ancestors whose memory was kept alive in stories and songs. At the center of this village, in both place and spirit, lived a woman named Iya Agba. She was not the oldest, but she carried her years with a grace that made her everyone's grandmother. Her back was slightly bent from a lifetime of grinding peppers on the stone. Her hands were maps of hard work and kindness, but her eyes held the calm, knowing light of the evening star. Iya Agba's true gift was her cooking and her boundless giving. Her kitchen hut was a perpetual hub of warmth and aroma. No one who came to her door with hunger left with an empty stomach. The fragrance from her single, large, blackened earthenware pot was the village's anchor, a daily promise of community and care. This pot was her legacy, passed down from her mother's mother. In it, she cooked legendary ifo riro, a vegetable stew so rich it could make a satisfied man weep. She made umla as smooth as the night sky and jollof rice that was a festival of color and spice. Her pot, it seemed, had a gentle magic of its own. No matter how many people gathered, there was always just enough, with a little left for a wandering spirit or a hungry night creature. But one year the harmony shattered. The rains failed. The sun rose each day as a fierce, unforgiving hammer, baking the earth until it cracked. The yam vines withered. The corn stood thin and brittle. The hunt yielded little, for the animals too grew thin and desperate. Ididara's once bursting granaries echoed with a hollow, terrifying emptiness. Fear, a cold and unfamiliar serpent, coiled itself around the heart of the village. The joyful noise of children playing dwindled to a faint whisper. The evening gatherings around the fire grew silent, save for the aching grumble of hungry bellies. The shared meals ceased, as each family retreated behind closed doors, guarding their dwindling stores with desperate, secretive eyes. The spirit of Omaluabi, of honor, generosity, and community, seemed to be drying up with the land. Iya Agba watched this change with a deep, personal sorrow. Her own supplies had dwindled to almost nothing. The once constant stream of visitors to her kitchen hut had trickled to a stop, not for lack of need, but from a shameful pride that forbade people from showing their desperation. Her great pot sat cold and empty for days on end, which to her felt like a physical pain, an abandonment of her very purpose. One particularly harsh evening, as the sun bled a dull red into a dusty horizon, Iya Agba sat before her cold hearth. Her last handful of gari was gone, shared that afternoon with a neighbor's crying child. She felt a hollow ache that was more than hunger. It was the despair of a heart made for giving, with nothing left to give. She looked at her ancestral pot, its blackened surface absorbing the dying light. "Old friend," she whispered, her voice rough with dust and disuse, "you have fed kings and beggars, the joyous and the grieving. Have you now retired? Is the story of our plenty at its end?" As if in answer, a faint breeze, carrying the distant, rare scent of forest orchids, whispered through the hut. Iya Agba, guided by an impulse she did not understand, reached out and placed her worn palms on the curve of the pot. A strange warmth, not from any fire, pulsed through the clay into her skin. At that moment, a feeble knock sounded at her door. Outside stood a figure so thin, he seemed a shadow woven from sticks and tattered cloth. He was a stranger, older than time itself, with a beard like tangled moss and eyes that held the deep, quiet darkness of a forest pool. He leaned heavily on a staff of gnarled Irako wood. "Good mother?" the old man rasped, his voice like dry leaves rubbing together. "The road is long and my strength fails me. I seek not gold, nor a soft bed, only a mouthful of water to wet my throat and, if it exists in this hungry time, a crumb to quiet the storm in my belly." Iya Agba looked at him. Every rational thought shouted that she had nothing, that she must turn him away to preserve her own fading strength. But her heart, the heart that defined her very being, spoke a different, commanding truth. To turn away a guest, especially one so weary, was to sever the final thread connecting Ididara to its own soul. "Come in, Baba," she said, her voice finding its old steadiness. "You are welcome. Water I have. A crumb. Let me see what the earth and my wits can still provide." She settled him on a low stool and gave him a calabash of cool water, which he drank with slow, profound gratitude. Then she turned to her empty kitchen. A single, small, wrinkled tomato sat forgotten in a corner. A few bitter herbs struggled by her doorstep. A pinch of salt remained in a tiny gourd. And hidden away was a dried piece of smoked fish, no bigger than her thumb, saved for a day of utter necessity. It was not a meal. It was a symbol of despair. With a sigh that was also a prayer, Iya Agba built a small fire. She cleaned her great pot meticulously, poured in a little water, and began to prepare the most meager offering of her life. She chopped the tomato, shredded the herbs, and broke the tiny fish into the water. The aroma was faint, a mere ghost of her former feasts. As this pitiful broth began to simmer, something shifted. The old man, who had been watching in serene silence, stirred. He reached into the folds of his ragged cloak and drew out a small, leathery seed pod. Without a word, he leaned forward and dropped it into the simmering water. "A seed of memory," he murmured, his voice now clear and deep like flowing water. "For a soup of kindness." Iya Agba was about to protest. A strange seed could be poisonous, but the words died in her throat. The moment the seed touched the liquid, a profound transformation began. A rich, deep, and utterly beguiling aroma blossomed from the pot, flooding the hut. The smell of ripe farm vegetables, of smoked meats, of nutty palm oil and earthy spices. The sound of the simmer changed from a weak sputter to a contented, bubbling song. Iya Agba peered inside. The watery broth had vanished. In its place was a luscious, red gold stew, brimming with greens, chunks of tender meat, and plump snails. It was more abundant, more fragrant, than anything her pot had ever produced, even in times of greatest plenty. She stared, dumbfounded, then turned to look at her guest. The stool was empty. The old man was gone. Only the calabash of water, now mysteriously full to the brim again, and a faint, fading scent of forest orchids remained. Iya Agba knew, with a certainty that settled in her bones, that she had been visited. Whether by an ancestor, an Ariwith grave in disguise, or the very spirit of the forest itself, she did not know. But she understood the test and the gift. The pot had remembered its purpose, awakened by a seed of selfless kindness. She took a clean calabash bowl and ladled a generous portion of the miraculous stew. She ate slowly, and as the food warmed her body, a strength and clarity she had not felt in months returned to her. The hollow hunger vanished, replaced by a deep, singing satisfaction. The next morning, as the village awoke to another day of grinding despair, a familiar, impossible aroma drifted on the breeze. It was the scent of Iya Agba's Ifo Riro, but magnified, perfected, woven through with promises of nourishment and hope. It wound its way into every compound, slipping through closed doors and shuttered windows, teasing the nostrils of the sleeping, the weary, the hopeless. At first, people thought it a cruel trick of their hungry minds. But the scent persisted, growing stronger, more insistent, a golden thread pulling at their spirits. One by one, drawn by a need deeper than pride, the people of Ididara began to emerge from their homes. They shuffled, gaunt and silent, towards the source of the smell, gathering like spectral figures around Iya Agba's compound. She stood in her doorway, before her steaming, fragrant pot. She looked at their hollow cheeks, their eyes wide with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "The forest has remembered us," she announced, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the crowd. "And it has reminded me of who we are. This pot," she gestured to the vessel, now gently bubbling over a small, steady fire, "will not cook for one or for a family. It will cook for Ididara." It will cook until the rains return and the earth smiles again. But it has one rule, given to me by the spirit of the woods. She paused, letting her words sink into the parched soil of their hearts. No one may eat from this pot alone. It is a pot of community. You must bring to it whatever you find. A handful of bitter leaves, a wild tuber, a caught lizard, a few locusts, a pinch of salt. You must share your story while you wait. And you must eat together here. The food is not meant to be carried away into silence. It is meant to be shared on mats under the sky. This is the condition. A murmur ran through the crowd. Share their pitiful finds? Eat in the open? For some, whose pride had fossilized into resentment, the idea was offensive. But for most, the aroma was a siren's call their bodies could not deny. A young hunter, ashamed of his empty snares, stepped forward first. He placed 2 small, lean rats on the bench beside the pot. "It is all I have," he mumbled, eyes downcast. "It is enough," Iya Agba said, and with a deft, respectful motion, she prepared them and added them to the stew. An old woman, her back bent double from years of labor, laid down 3 small, hard tubers she had dug from the forest floor with her bare, bleeding hands. A child offered a handful of edible termites he had collected in a leaf. A man brought a gourd of muddy water from a distant stream he had spent half a day finding. One by one, the people came forward, each contributing their meager, desperate finds. And with each addition, no matter how small or unappetizing, the aroma from the pot seemed to deepen and grow richer, as if the pot itself was acknowledging their effort and their surrender to the collective. It accepted all offerings without judgment. Iya Agba cooked, and as she stirred the ever-full pot, she told stories. She told of Anansi the spider who used wit over strength. She told of the tortoise and his proverbs, teaching lessons of patience and cunning. She reminded them of the great feasts of years past, weaving a tapestry of memory that made the present hardship seem like a single, difficult chapter in a long, glorious book of their existence. When the stew was ready, she began to ladle it out. There were no bowls to carry away. People sat in circles on mats spread under the large almond tree in her compound. They ate from shared calabashes, their fingers touching in the common bowl. The first taste was a revelation. It was not just food. It was the essence of nourishment. It tasted of perfect, ripe vegetables, of rich broth, of smoky meat and fragrant spices. But underneath it all, each person tasted something personal and profound. The hunter tasted the thrill of a successful chase. The farmer tasted the first rain on dry soil. The mother tasted the comfort of a child held close. The elder tasted the respect of the village. The food filled their bellies completely, driving away the sharp pangs of hunger. But more importantly, it soothed their spirits. As they ate together, talking slowly at first, then with growing animation, the old bonds began to reknit. Laughter, a sound thought to be extinct, cracked like a dry branch and then blossomed, hesitant at first, then full and rolling. Stories were shared, not just by Iya Agba, but by everyone. The village of Ididara, around Iya Agba's magical pot, began to come back to life, not with full stomachs alone, but with full hearts. For many days the rhythm held. Each morning, people would bring their foraged finds to Iya Agba's compound. The pot would accept them, transform them, and by midday, a feast would be ready. The clearing under the almond tree became the new heart of Ididara, beating with the sounds of conversation, storytelling, and shared contentment. The physical hunger was kept at bay, and the spiritual sickness of isolation was healed. Children played again, their energy returning. Elders debated and proverbialized under the shade. The village remembered its name, the storyteller's joy, but news, carried by the wind, by birds, and by the desperate whispers of a starving land, travels fast. Stories of a village that ate daily, of a magical pot that never emptied, of an old woman who cooked with the blessing of the spirits, spread to the neighboring settlements. These villages, Iligboya, Okoida, Agbid, were suffering the same fate as Ididara had, but they had no Iya Agba, no seed of memory. At first, it was just a few solitary figures, shadows at the edge of the forest, watching the gatherings with hollow eyes from a distance. Then, small family groups began to appear, hovering at the tree line of Ididara, their thin bodies wrapped in rags, their hope a fragile, flickering thing. They did not dare approach, intimidated by the sight of a functioning community, a sight they themselves had lost. Inside Ididara, the sight of these outsiders stirred complex feelings. For many, the instinct of Omaluabi stirred immediately. "We must invite them," said the hunter who had offered the first rats. "The pot was given for hunger, and their hunger is as great as ours was." But a faction, their own security still feeling new and fragile, resisted. Their spokesman was Adibowale, a farmer who had once been prosperous and proud. His pride had been wounded deeply by the drought, and the salvation of the pot, while accepted, had not yet fully melted the ice in his heart. "Think," Adibowale argued during an evening gathering. The pot, now a permanent fixture under the great tree, bubbled softly beside them. "This is our blessing. Our forest spirit gave the seed to our Iya Agba. The pot sits on our land. We have just enough for ourselves. If we open our arms to every starving stranger, they will come in numbers like locusts. They will drain the pot dry, and we will be back to gnawing on bitter roots while they take our miracle from us." A dangerous rumble of agreement came from those whose fear had been deeper than their hunger, those who still viewed the world through the harsh lens of scarcity. "Adibowale speaks sense," one woman said. "Charity begins at home. Let them find their own magic." Iya Agba had been listening, her face a calm mask, her hands busy stirring. When the arguments died down, she spoke, her voice not loud, but penetrating the silence. "Adibowale," she began, "when you brought me those 3 withered okras yesterday, where did you find them?" He was taken aback by the simple, specific question. "By the stream. The one that borders the old yam fields near the Iligboya path. The stream that flows from their land into ours," Iya Agba said softly, like a teacher pointing out a fundamental truth. "And you, Basid, the mushrooms you added this morning came from the fallen log in the gray forest, which is claimed by no village but is nourished by rains that fall on all. This food, this magic, was born from a gift given to a stranger." She let the word hang in the air. "It was fed by your offerings, yes, but also by your stories, your shared laughter, your collective tears. Can a blessing that grows from sharing be preserved by hoarding? If we build a wall around this pot, we build a wall around our own hearts. The magic does not live in the clay. It lives in the circle around it." She then turned her gaze from them to the weary, hopeful faces barely visible in the twilight at the edge of the clearing. "The pot does not ask for a lineage or a village name. It asks for a contribution and for community. If we turn them away, we are not protecting the magic. We are breaking it. We will be telling the spirit that visited me that our kindness was a transaction, for our people only, not a truth of our character. The pot will remember that, too." Her words, steeped in simple logic and profound morality, hung in the cooling air. They shamed some and inspired others. Adibowale said nothing more, but his brow was furrowed in deep thought, a war raging between his old pride and the new truth being presented. The test came at dawn. A family from Iligboya, a man, his wife, and 2 small children whose eyes were too big for their faces, gathered their courage and walked slowly into the clearing. They carried a pathetic offering, 1 scrawny, half-plucked chicken. The man held it out, his eyes on the ground, full of shame for the meagerness of his gift. A long, tense moment passed. All of Ididara watched. Then, with a grunt that seemed to be pulled from the very core of his being, Adibowale stood up. He walked across the clearing, not looking at his fellow villagers. He stopped before the man from Iligboya, took the thin chicken, gave a short, sharp nod, and placed it by Iya Agba's pot. It was a crack in the dam. The hunter followed, welcoming the family and showing them where to sit. Others from Ididara brought them water, made space on a mat. The newcomers, tears of relief mixing with the dust on their cheeks, added their chicken to the pot. And the pot, true to its nature, bubbled joyfully, its aroma seeming to strengthen, to sweeten, as if to say, "This is the way." From that day, the clearing transformed. It became a vibrant, multicultural haven. People from Iya Agba, Okoida, and Agbid arrived daily. They brought their unique finds, different kinds of leafy vegetables, strange tubers, peculiar spices. They shared not just food, but recipes, songs in different dialects, farming techniques for marginal land, and stories from their own traditions. Tales of different heroes, different tricksters, different morals that all pointed to the same universal truths. The clearing became a living marketplace of hope, knowledge, and human connection. The pot's magic thrived spectacularly on this diversity. The stew became a masterpiece of harmony. Each spoonful was a perfect blend. Yet somehow, it also managed to satisfy each person's deepest craving individually. A homesick person from Okoida might taste the distinct smoky flavor of their native pepper. A mother from Agbid might be reminded of her grandmother's soup. It was a magic of unity that did not erase difference, but celebrated it. For a time, it seemed the ideal had been achieved. The community had expanded, not broken. The blessing had been shared, not diminished. They had weathered the first threat from within. But a new shadow, subtler and more dangerous than open opposition, had entered the clearing. He had arrived with the others, a young man from a distant, particularly ravaged village to the north. His name was Durojiye. He was lean where others were thin, his eyes not hollow with despair but sharp with a calculating intelligence. For 3 days he brought nothing to the pot, yet he ate heartily, always sitting slightly apart, his eyes rarely leaving Iya Agba and her pot. Durojiye did not believe in forest spirits or ancestral magic. He believed in cause and effect, in leverage, in opportunity. He listened to the stories and heard charming lies. He saw the communal joy and saw a useful tool for control. In the miraculous pot, he did not see a blessing. He saw a proprietary secret, a rare recipe, a special clay, a hidden trick that could make a man a king if owned privately. The idea of sharing it freely seemed to him the height of foolishness. He began to move through the gathering like a careful spider, spinning whispers in the darker corners. He sought out those who still wore their hunger like a hidden scar, those like Adabo, in whom the seed of community had been planted but had not yet fully rooted. "Look around," Durojiye would murmur, his voice low and reasonable. "Why should one old woman hold the power of life and death for hundreds? Why should we all be beggars at her hearth, grateful for scraps from a pot that should belong to everyone, yet is controlled by one? This magic, if it is just clay and fire, can be learned. If it is in the pot itself, it can be owned. Imagine it in your own compound. You would never know fear again. Your influence would be boundless. Your name would be remembered not as a recipient of charity, but as a lord of plenty." The poison was insidious. It framed selfishness as logic, theft as rightful acquisition, and community as weakness. It found fertile ground in hearts that were still tender from their recent starvation, hearts that secretly feared the return of that pain. Adabo, struggling with his lingering pride, found the whispers troublingly seductive. The idea of control, of never being at the mercy of fate or another's kindness again, was a powerful lure. A plot, dark and secret, was conceived in the shadows of the thriving, unsuspecting clearing. The plan was simple, born of Durojiye's cold observation. During the large, bustling midday meal, when everyone was engrossed in eating, sharing, and storytelling, when vigilance was at its lowest, they would strike. 2 men from Ididara, whose hearts Durojiye had poisoned, would start a loud, dramatic argument over a misplaced item, escalating it into a shoving match. The commotion would draw every eye. In that moment of universal distraction, Durojiye would dart to the fire, seize the pot, and disappear with it into the thick forest behind Iya Agba's hut. They would hide, learn its secrets, and decide their future as masters of the magic. The chosen day dawned like any other. The sun was harsh, but under the broad canopy of the almond tree, the clearing was cool. The air was thick with the pot's irresistible aroma, and the hum of 100 conversations in different tongues. People from 4 villages mingled freely. Iya Agba, her face serene, ladled out the stew into waiting bowls. All seemed as it should be. Durojuyi took his place at the edge of the crowd, eating slowly, his body coiled tight like a spring. He exchanged a barely perceptible nod with his 2 accomplices across the clearing. The signal came. One accomplice suddenly stood, pointing accusingly at the other. "Thief! You took the bracelet my wife gave me. Liar! I saw you sell it for extra food last week," the other shouted back. The argument exploded, drawing instant attention. Voices rose. The 2 men grappled, knocking over a bowl of stew, the commotion creating a perfect circle of spectacle. Every head turned towards the fight. Iya Agba looked up, a frown of concern on her face. Now, Durojuyi moved. He was swift and silent, a predator striking. He had thick rags ready in his hands. In 3 strides, he was at the low fire. He wrapped the rags around the pot's rim and lifted. The moment his hands made contact, even through the cloth, a jolt of pure, white-hot agony shot up his arms. It was not the heat of the fire, which the pot had always curiously moderated. This was a metaphysical burn, the heat of 1,000 shames, 1,000 broken promises. He screamed, a raw, animal sound that cut through the noise of the fight. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the spiritual assault. As he lifted the pot, a tidal wave of profound, soul-rending emptiness washed over him. It was the amplified essence of every hunger the pot had ever cured, combined with the icy loneliness of 1,000 meals eaten in solitude. It was the void where community should have been. The weight of the stolen blessing crushed his spirit. His scream turned into a guttural choke. His fingers, seared and numb, lost their grip. The pot fell. It did not shatter on the hard earth. It struck with a deep, resonant tichoum that was felt in the chest more than heard with the ear. The sound silenced everything, the fight, the gasps, the very birds in the trees. The pot lay on its side, but no glorious, fragrant stew spilled out to be wasted on the ground. Instead, from its upturned mouth, a thick, silent, gray fog began to pour. It was not smoke from a fire. It was cold and weighty, moving with an unnatural purpose. It rolled out in swift, swallowing waves, enveloping the fire, the fallen pot, Durojuyi writhing on the ground, and then the entire crowd. Panic should have ensued, but something worse happened. As the gray fog touched the people, it did not harm their bodies. It invaded their minds, their memories. The hunter, who had just been laughing with a man from Okoida, suddenly forgot the man's name. He forgot the joy of sharing his first catch. All he remembered was the gnawing, personal hunger in his own belly, and a sudden, sharp suspicion that the man from Okoida might steal his next meal. The mother who had been feeding a child not her own dropped the spoon. She forgot the warmth of the communal circle. She only remembered the desperate need to secure food for her own children, pushing others aside as potential competitors. Adibowale, who had been quietly proud of his role in welcoming strangers, felt the memory of that pride dissolve. In its place rose the old, familiar fear. There is not enough. They are taking what is mine. The fog of forgetfulness did not bring violence. It brought a profound, chilling isolation. It erased the shared narrative, the hard-won bonds, the tasted magic of unity. It reduced each person to the core, scared, selfish individual they had been at the depth of the drought. The magic of the pot was not just broken. Its counterspell had been activated, a curse of amplified individualism. The clearing descended into a chaos not of noise, but of cold silence and confused, selfish intent. People looked at each other not as family or allies, but as strangers, as obstacles, as threats. They began to back away from each other, from the clearing, their eyes darting with fear and newly rekindled greed. The beautiful tapestry of community unraveled in moments, leaving only separate, frayed threads. In the center of it all, untouched by the gray fog which parted around her like water around a stone, stood Iya Agba. Her heart, which had never wavered from the true purpose of the pot, was immune to the curse. She saw everything with devastating clarity. Durojuyi moaning on the ground, clutching his spiritually scorched hands. The people she loved transformed back into fearful shadows, and her beloved pot, lying cold and dormant, its interior dark and utterly empty. A pain sharper than any physical hunger lanced through her. This was the consequence the old forest spirit had not needed to speak aloud. The magic could be shattered not by scarcity, but by greed. Not by a lack of food, but by a lack of heart. Her tears, when they came, were silent and hot, cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. They were tears for the beauty that had been, and for the betrayal that had destroyed it. She did not speak. Words were useless in this fog of forgotten fellowship. They would not hear her, or if they did, they would no longer understand the language of community. Instead, with a weariness that reached into her bones, Iya Agba walked slowly to the fallen pot. She knelt in the dirt before it, her old knees pressing into the hard earth. She ignored the confused and now suspicious glances thrown her way. With her own bare, work-worn hands, she grasped the cold clay. With a grunt of effort, she righted the heavy vessel. It was now cold as a river stone in the deepest shade, devoid of any lingering warmth. She then gathered the scattered, extinguished firewood. She found her firestone and a piece of iron. There, in the center of the gray fog and the retreating, selfish crowd, she began the laborious process of sparking a new flame. Click, click, click. The small, sharp sounds were absurd in the oppressive silence. She nurtured the first tiny spark with her breath, with dry leaves from her wrapper, with a focus that shut out the crumbling world around her. A small, new, and terribly vulnerable flame flickered to life. Iya Agba placed the firewood around it. She had no ingredients. The offerings of the day lay scattered and abandoned, their meaning forgotten by their owners. The pot was empty, so Iya Agba did the only thing she could. She reached into the folds of her own wrapper, to the most secret place, and took out her last, most precious possession. A small, smooth amulet of deep black ebony, carved by her mother's hand, the only physical token of her lineage and her most private memories. She held it to her lips for a moment, whispering a final goodbye to her personal past. Then, she dropped it into the empty, cold pot. She picked up her ladle, and she began to cook. She stirred the empty pot over the tiny, defiant fire. She hummed an old lullaby, the one her mother had sung to her, her voice a thin, fragile thread in the gray silence. She whispered the names of everyone she had ever fed, from the oldest elder to the smallest child, from Ididara and from the other villages. She listed the stories she had told, the laughter she had shared, the quiet moments of comfort given with a bowl of food. She was not cooking with vegetables or meat. She was cooking with the pure, undiluted essence of her lifetime of giving. Every smile exchanged over a meal, every tear wiped with the corner of her wrapper, every lesson taught through proverb, every moment of human connection ever fostered at her hearth. She poured her memory, her love, and her unwavering faith in the idea of us into the void. For a long, long time, she stirred the emptiness. The crowd, at first mocking her madness in their cold new state, then indifferent, gradually grew still. They watched, the absurdity, the profound sincerity of the act. An old woman, hungry herself, burned by betrayal, giving her absolute last possession and all her remaining strength to an empty pot, began, slowly, to pierce the gray fog in their minds. It was a light too strange, too pure, for the fog to completely extinguish. It was the hunter, his memory flickering like the weak flame, who first moved. A vague, aching sensation, not in his stomach but in his chest, pulled him. He remembered a taste, not on his tongue but in his spirit, the taste of honor shared. Without a word, he walked forward. He placed his hunting knife, his most prized tool, his identity, his means of survival, on the ground beside the pot. Then he sat down in the dirt, waiting. It was the first crack in the ice. A mother, remembering a ghost of warmth, the feel of a child not her own leaning against her, came forward. She placed her colorful, carefully tied head tie, a symbol of her pride and beauty, next to the knife. Agba whale, watching, felt a storm of shame and a sudden, crashing return of memory tear through him. He saw his own hand taking the scrawny chicken. He felt the nod he gave the stranger. He remembered the pot bubbling in response. With a sob that was also a release, he stumbled forward. He had no token, so he knelt in the dust before Iya Agba, his forehead touching the earth in a gesture of profound apology and surrender to the truth she embodied. One by one, the people came forward. They did not bring food. They brought tokens of their true selves, of the identities they had reclaimed in community and were now offering back in atonement. A carver gave his finest chisel. A singer offered her favorite bracelet. A storyteller gave his smooth talking stone. A child placed a much-cherished shiny pebble. They were offering pieces of their isolated selves back into the communal bowl, hoping for a new mixture. As the last person from the clearing placed their offering, a young girl's single strand of blue beads, beside the now surrounded pot, a deep, resonant hum emanated from the vessel. It was a sound of power returning, but a different power than before. The thick, gray fog that had choked the clearing began to stir. It did not blow away on the wind. Instead, it swirled, drawn like water spiraling down a drain, pulling back into the mouth of the pot. As the last wisps vanished, swallowed by the darkness within, the natural light of the day returned, clear and bright. The confused, cold looks faded from people's faces, replaced by dawning awareness, then flooding recognition, and finally, by a collective, staggering wave of remorse and relief. They remembered everything: the sharing, the joy, the betrayal, and the long, painful stirring of the empty pot. They looked at each other, truly seeing each other again, and tears of shame and reunion flowed freely. Iya Agba, her strength nearly spent, looked into the pot. The amulet, the knife, the head tie, the chisel, the beads. All the physical offerings were gone. In their place, the pot was filled to the brim with clear, sparkling water. And floating on its surface, dancing in the light, were thousands upon thousands of tiny, vibrant green seeds, each one pulsing with a soft, internal light. The seed of memory, Iya Agba said, her voice a tired but triumphant whisper, has listened. It has multiplied. This was never a pot of endless food. It was always a pot of endless remembrance. Remembrance of who we are when we choose to be together. She took a single, clean calabash, dipped it into the pot, and drank deeply of the seed-infused water. A visible wave of calm strength washed over her. She then began to ladle it out, giving each person a sip. As they drank, a final, practical transformation occurred. Their physical hunger, which had begun to return with the broken magic, was sated by the water in a way food never could be. But more importantly, knowledge blossomed in their minds, clear, specific, practical wisdom. It was not magic, but the recovered, collective intelligence of their ancestors and their own combined experience. The hunter suddenly understood how to track not just by sight, but by the subtle signs of insect life and root growth that pointed to hidden water sources. The farmers from different villages shared a sudden, unified understanding of which wild grasses could be domesticated into drought-resistant grains, and how to intercrop them to nourish the soil. The elders remembered ancient techniques for preserving seasonal bounty with forest herbs and smoke. The foragers could now clearly identify every edible tuber, leaf, and fungus in the forest, knowing their nutritional value and how to harvest them sustainably. The pot's final, greatest gift was not dependency. It was empowered interdependence. It gave them not a fish, but the knowledge to fish, farm, and forage together permanently. It restored their agency and their unity in one stroke. The great sharing began anew, but it was fundamentally different. They did not gather daily to receive a meal from a magic source. They gathered to work. The united people of Ididura, Iligboya, Okoida, and Agbid formed a single, cooperative community. They used their new, shared knowledge to tap the hidden springs, creating a reliable water system. They cleared and planted fields with the resilient seeds of understanding, not waiting for a miracle, but building their future with their own hands. They built a new, shared granary right in the clearing under the almond tree. a granary that belonged to no single village but to the land of many hearts, as they began to call their union. The pot itself was never used to cook food again. Its work was done. It was placed on a simple pedestal of woven riverstones under the almond tree, a revered relic and a permanent memorial. It remained empty, but to the touch, it was always faintly warm, a silent testament to the living heart of the community. On the day the first harvest from their collective labor was brought into the clearing, a harvest of strange, hardy grains and bountiful vegetables that was ample for all, a final, gentle wonder occurred. As the people cheered, a slender, bright green shoot sprouted from the base of the stone pedestal. It grew with astonishing, visible speed, climbing the ancient trunk of the almond tree, weaving through its branches with purposeful grace. By sunset, it had covered the entire canopy in large, heart-shaped leaves and heavy, pendulous pods of a deep, lustrous purple. When the pods were carefully opened, they were found to be filled with beans of impossible, beautiful colors. Deep indigo, speckled gold, vibrant crimson, and earthy orange. They were named Ava Iranti, the beans of remembrance. When cooked, these beans made a dish that was incredibly nutritious, deeply satisfying, and grew with astonishing abundance with minimal care. They became the staple that sustained the United Villages, a daily, edible reminder of their journey from scarcity through magical dependency, through betrayal, and finally, to self-sufficient unity. Iya Agba lived to see many more seasons, her hair turning the color of moonlight, her eyes never losing their kind, knowing light. She became the chief storyteller of Isle Honolulu, the land of many hearts. She never cooked from the great pot again, but she taught every child the story. She taught them how to stir kindness into their own family pots, how to listen for the stories in the simmering water, and how to always make room for one more on the mat. Travelers who heard the tale would visit the clearing. They would be invited to share a meal of the beans of remembrance, and as they ate, an elder would tell the story of the pot that fed the forest. The story always ended the same way. The pot is empty now, but its lesson is full. The greatest magic is not the one that fills your belly without effort. The greatest magic is the one you make yourselves, by choosing to share your seed, to stir the pot together, and to remember that your true strength lies not in what you keep for yourself, but in what you dare to give away. And so, the pot sat, and the vine grew, and the people thrived, remembering.